Today I'm with Greg Jemmeson from Jemmeson Fisher, Solicitor and Accountants. Good afternoon, Greg.
Hi, Brian.
Our subject today is the Fraud Prevention Guidelines. So we get questions all the time. Does an agent have to check the identity of the person that they're doing business with?
It's an interesting point, and it's not been tested in the tribunals or in the courts. The Fraud Prevention Guidelines are an adjunct to the Supervision Guidelines set out by the Commissioner of Fair Trading. Now, though it forms part of the rules of conduct, there is no specific rule of conduct about the guidelines themselves.
Fair Trading are fining agents if you don't have them.
Now, if you read the actual guidelines themselves, and if you go to them, there is instructive wording like the agent should use the following guidelines. The agent should retain in the sales file proof of identity checklist. Now, it's a matter of what do those words mean legally. Now, unfortunately, as we know, and we talked previous times about, the agent receives an $1,100 fine.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of going and defending that fine to have it overturned far exceeds the fine in itself. My recommendation is if anybody is being fined for these types of things is to contact us, because what we would do would be submissions on their behalf as to why these guidelines don't need to be complied with in certain instances. And I'll give you an example. It might be a vendor who you have acted for numerous times. It may well be a developer. You've known, you sold him the original site.
Yep.
You know he's the owner of it. You've sold many times on his behalf. To go to them and say, show me your driver's licence and prove to me you are my vendor, a little bit difficult for some people.
Look, I did CPD in a Wagga a couple of years ago, and this cocky came in, drove 200 kilometres to come into the CPD, and these things were coming up, and he's going, well, I know everyone in town. I lived in town and born in town. When I do an auction, I don't even ask for their ID to on the bidding register because I already know them. So there's very difficult ways for some agents to get around this, but could an agent make their own policy and procedure around fraud prevention guidelines?
Unfortunately, no. Again, these are guidelines about the sort of checks they have to make, but the guideline from the Commissioner says they have to have some form of proof of identity attached to the file. Well, again, we all know proof of identity are things like driver's licence.
Do you have to have a copy of that, or you just write down you've seen a copy of that?
Well, if we actually look at the actual suggested thing, it says document type, document number, date of issue, expiry date, so driver's licence, and it was cited. So they're setting out those sorts of things, very similar to the bidder's register. And again, this is a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction which came out of two instances in 2010 and 2011 in Western Australia, where a fraudster went to two different real estate agents, sold properties which they didn't own. But what we need
to be the property management first.
Yes. And what we need to be aware of is the process of selling properties and the system of title is very different in Western Australia than it is in New South Wales. Now, that aside doesn't mean that fraud won't occur, but the instances of it occurring are very minimal. But again, this is the type of red tape that agents have to go through, and they have to be aware if they don't have this type of documentation in their file, again, Fair Trading have got the discretion to fine them.
So they need to check their identity?
Unfortunately, yes.
And if they don't, they could be fined?
That's the risk, again, we talk about, yes.